It all started with a handshake I refused to give, that single moment, my hand hanging in the air while my son Derek turned his back and walked away. Should have told me everything I needed to know about the man he'd become. But pride is a peculiar thing. It blinds you to the truth even when it is staring you dead in the face. And by God, I was blind for far too long. My name is Robert Thornton, and at 73 years old, I've built an empire worth over $10 million. I started with nothing but calloused hands and a willingness to outwork every other man on the construction site. 50 years of 12-hour days, missed birthdays, and sacrificed weekends built Thornton Construction from a two-man operation into the largest commercial building company in 3 states. I told myself it was all for my family, for my wife Margaret, for Derek, for the grandchildren I hoped would one day inherit what I'd built. But somewhere along the way, the foundation cracked, and I didn't notice until the whole damn thing came crashing down. Derek was born on a Tuesday in April, 3 weeks early, and screaming loud enough to wake the dead. Margaret said he came into this world fighting, and she was right about that. He fought against everything: bedtimes, vegetables, homework, rules. As a boy, he was fire and motion, never still, never satisfied. I admired that spirit even when it drove me to distraction. I saw myself in him, that same hunger to prove something to the world. I was 42 when he was born, already deep into building my business. Margaret handled most of the raising while I handled the finances. That is how we divided it, how marriages worked back then. I provided, she nurtured. Simple, clean, except nothing about parenthood is simple or clean. And I learned that lesson far too late. Derek excelled at sports, football, baseball, track. He was competitive, aggressive, always pushing to be the best. I went to his games when I could, which wasn't often enough. When I was there, I cheered louder than any other father in those bleachers. When I wasn't, I made sure he knew I was proud of him. At least I thought I did. Maybe I just assumed he knew. The real trouble started when Derek turned 16. He wanted a car, not just any car, but a brand new Mustang he'd seen at the dealership. Bright red, all the extras. I told him no. I told him if he wanted a car, he could work for it like I had. I offered him a job on one of my construction crews that summer, said I'd match whatever he saved dollar for dollar. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. All my friends got cars for their birthdays, he said. You are a millionaire, Dad. Why are you being cheap? That word. Cheap, it hit something in me. I'd grown up wearing hand-me-downs and eating government cheese. I'd built everything from nothing, and my own son thought I was being cheap for trying to teach him the value of work. Because I want you to understand what things cost, I told him. Not just in dollars, but in sweat and time. That is a lesson worth more than any car. He didn't take the job. Instead, he sulked for months, barely speaking to me. Margaret tried to smooth things over, playing mediator between 2 stubborn men. Eventually, Derek's grandfather, Margaret's father, bought him a used Honda. Not the Mustang he wanted, but wheels nonetheless. Derek thanked his grandfather effusively and didn't say a word to me for weeks. That was the first crack, though I didn't recognize it then. College came, and Derek wanted to go to an expensive private university across the country. I offered to pay for state school in full or split the cost of the private school if he took out loans for the rest. Again, trying to teach responsibility, investment in his own future. Again, he saw it as me being cheap. We compromised. I paid for 3 years fully. He paid his senior year through loans and part-time work. He studied business, which pleased me. I imagined him joining Thornton Construction, learning the company from the ground up, eventually taking over. I mentioned this once during a visit, and Derek's face went dark. I am not spending my life covered in sawdust, he said. I have my own plans. His own plans turned out to be investment banking in New York City. High-stakes finance, expensive suits, the kind of life that looked impressive from the outside. He got hired at a mid-tier firm right out of school and moved to Manhattan. Margaret cried when he left. I told her it was good for him to make his own way. For a few years things were cordial. We talked on holidays. He came home for Christmas, usually just for a day or two. He was always checking his phone, taking calls, distracted by work. I understood that I'd been the same way at his age. Maybe that is why I didn't push harder for his attention. Then he met Veronica. Veronica Chen was everything. Derek apparently wanted sophisticated, ambitious, from a wealthy family with connections in high places. She was beautiful in that polished, untouchable way, always dressed like she was about to have her photograph taken. When Derek brought her home to meet us, she smiled with perfect white teeth and said all the right things, but her eyes were calculating every detail, pricing every piece of furniture. Margaret whispered to me later that she didn't trust her. I said we should give her a chance, that Derek seemed happy, but Margaret had instincts I should have listened to. They married in an elaborate ceremony in Manhattan that cost more than my first house. Derek asked me to contribute $25,000 toward the wedding. I wrote the check, but I'll admit I was surprised at the amount. When I was young, we got married at the courthouse and celebrated with beer and pizza. Times change, I told myself. The distance between us grew. Derek climbed the corporate ladder aggressively, changing firms twice for better positions. Veronica worked in public relations for luxury brands. They moved to a penthouse apartment that cost more per month than most people make in a year. They sent photos, themselves at galas, on vacation in Europe, drinking champagne on yachts. Margaret would look at these photos with a sad smile. "He is so far away," she'd say, and she didn't mean geographically. Then came the requests for money. It started small. Derek called saying he needed help with a down payment on a vacation property. $15,000. I sent it, happy to help my son invest wisely. Then it was a business opportunity that required capital. $50,000. He promised to pay it back with interest. I sent that too, though. I never saw repayment or heard about the opportunity again. The requests kept coming, growing larger. $100,000 for an investment fund he wanted to start. $75,000 to cover some temporary cash flow issues. $50,000 here, $30,000 there. Each time, there was an explanation, a promise, a reason why this money was crucial to his success. I started saying no sometimes, which didn't go over well. Derek would get angry, accusatory. He'd point out everything I'd spent on the business, on equipment and property, and ask why I wouldn't invest in my own son. Veronica would get on the phone, her voice honey-sweet, but edged with steel, explaining how much they were struggling, despite appearances, struggling in their penthouse, with their European vacations. Margaret urged me to keep giving. "He is our son," she'd say. "Family helps family." So I kept writing checks, kept draining accounts, kept telling myself I was being a good father. Over 5 years, I gave Derek nearly $800,000. Then Margaret got sick. It started with fatigue she couldn't shake, then pain she couldn't ignore. The diagnosis was ovarian cancer, stage 3. The doctor gave us options, treatments, statistics that made my blood run cold. We chose the most aggressive approach: surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, whatever it took. I called Derek immediately to tell him. He was quiet on the phone, then said he'd come visit soon. Soon turned out to be 3 weeks later, a flying visit between business trips. He stayed 4 hours, spent half that time on his phone, and left promising to return soon. He didn't come back for 2 months. Margaret never complained. She endured treatments that ravaged her body with grace and courage I couldn't comprehend. I closed my office, stopped taking new contracts, and spent every moment I could at her side. Nothing else mattered. Not the business, not money, not pride. Just her. The medical bills were staggering. Even with insurance, the experimental treatments and specialists cost hundreds of thousands. I paid without hesitation, liquidating investments and selling properties. I'd have sold everything I owned to give her another day. Derek called occasionally, always brief conversations. "How is Mom doing?" he'd ask, then fill the silence with talk about his latest deal or promotion. He promised to visit, but something always came up: an important meeting, a can't-miss conference, a client emergency. When I mentioned the medical costs during one call, explained I might need to sell one of the commercial properties, Derek went silent. Then he said, "You are not going to have much left for inheritance at this rate." I actually pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it, certain I'd misheard. "Your mother is fighting for her life," I said slowly, "and you are concerned about your inheritance." "I didn't mean it like that," he backpedaled quickly. "I just meant you should be careful not to let the hospitals take advantage. You know how they overcharge." But I knew exactly what he meant. I heard it in his tone, in the pause before he spoke. He was calculating, running numbers, watching his future assets evaporate into medical care. Margaret lasted 18 months after her diagnosis. 18 months of fighting and fading, of good days that gave us hope and bad days that stole it away. At the end, she was so small in that hospital bed, translucent skin stretched over bird-bone wrists, but her eyes were still fierce. Derek came for the final week. After I called and told him if he didn't come now, he'd regret it forever. He sat by her bed, held her hand, cried genuine tears. For those few days, I saw glimpses of the boy he'd been before ambition and money twisted something inside him. Margaret died on a Sunday morning with both of us beside her. Her last words were, "Take care of each other." We promised we would. Within 6 months, that promise was shattered. After the funeral, Derek stayed a week to help with arrangements. We went through Margaret's things together, dividing mementos and photographs. There were moments of connection, shared memories that made us both laugh through tears. I thought maybe her death would bring us closer, force us to remember what mattered. The day before he left, Derek sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd done his homework as a boy, where we'd had countless family dinners, and slid a folder across to me. "I've been thinking about the business," he said. "About what makes sense going forward." I opened the folder. Inside were documents, proposals, financial projections. Derek had prepared a complete plan for me to sell Thornton Construction to a competitor and invest the proceeds in a portfolio he would manage through his firm. "You are 70 now. Dad, you should retire. Enjoy life. Let me handle the financial side. I can grow this money considerably, set you up with income streams that don't require you to work." I read through the pages, seeing his vision, seeing also the management fees his firm would collect, the percentage of profits, the control he'd have over every dollar. "The business is my life," I said. "I am not ready to sell." The business was Mom's life too, and now she is gone. Holding on to it isn't going to bring her back. His voice was gentle, but something underneath it wasn't. "That is not why I am holding on to it." "Then why?" "Pride, stubbornness. You could be comfortable, secure, instead of grinding away at 70 years old. Because I built it and I am not done with it yet." Derek sat back, jaw tight. "Fine, but when you do sell, and you will eventually, I want to be involved in managing the assets. As your son, I think I've earned that right." Earned, that word sat wrong with me. After he left, I couldn't stop thinking about that conversation, that folder full of plans made without consulting me. I pulled my financial records and really looked at them for the first time in years. All those loans, all those gifts, $800,000 given to my son, not a penny repaid. I called him a week later. "Derek, I need to discuss all the money I've loaned you over the years." Silence on the line. "I am looking at my records, and it is nearly $800,000. I am not asking for it back, but I need to know, were those loans or gifts? For tax purposes, for my planning. Does it matter?" His voice had an edge now. "It matters to me. You are my father. You gave me money because you wanted to help. Now you want to what? Bill me for being your son. I want to understand our arrangement." "Our arrangement," he laughed, sharp and bitter. "I am your only child, your only heir. That money is just an advance on what I'll inherit anyway. You are being ridiculous, nickel and diming me when you are worth millions. That money put your mother through treatment, kept her comfortable in her final months. You said you needed it for investments, for emergencies, and I believed you. And you can afford it. Stop acting like I am bankrupting you. Jesus, Dad, you are turning into a miserly old man. That was the last time we spoke for 3 months. I threw myself back into work, taking on new projects, mentoring my crew leaders, doing the thing I'd always done best, building, but the joy was gone. Everything reminded me of Margaret, and the silence from my son echoed through the empty house. On what would have been Margaret's 68th birthday, I visited her grave. I told her about Derek, about the money, about how lost I felt. I cried there among the headstones, something I hadn't done since the funeral. When I got home, there was a message from Derek. Veronica was pregnant. I was going to be a grandfather. I called back immediately, congratulating him, asking questions. For a few minutes, it was almost normal. Derek sounded genuinely happy, excited. He said they were hoping for a boy. I said I'd be thrilled either way. "Maybe this is a fresh start," I ventured. "New chapter for all of us." "Yeah, maybe," Derek said, but he sounded distracted. "Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something. With the baby coming, we're going to need to upgrade apartments, and the down payment is substantial. I was hoping you could help out." My heart sank. "How much?" $250,000. I know it is a lot, but this is for your grandchild, Dad. Don't you want them to grow up in a nice home? I closed my eyes. Derek, I can't keep doing this. Can't or won't. Both, I've given you hundreds of thousands already. You've never paid back a cent, never even acknowledged. I am your son, your only child. Who else are you going to leave your money to charity? I am asking for help with your grandchild's home. And I am asking you to stand on your own feet. You are 40 years old, making good money. You don't need mine. The argument escalated from there. Words were said that couldn't be unsaid. Derek called me selfish, cruel, a hypocrite who'd neglected him as a child, and now wanted to control him as an adult. I called him entitled, ungrateful, someone who only saw me as an ATM. He hung up on me. I didn't hear from him again until after my grandson was born 5 months later. I got a text message with a photo, tiny red face, eyes squeezed shut, a shock of dark hair. Christopher James Thornton, 7 pounds 3 ounces. I stared at that photo for an hour. This new life, this continuation of our family. I wanted to meet him, hold him, be part of his life. I called Derek. He didn't answer. I left messages. Silence. A week later I received formal paperwork from an attorney. Derek was demanding repayment of loans. He claimed he'd given me over the years, completely fictional loans he'd fabricated with forged documents. It was absurd, transparent fraud, but it was also a declaration of war. I hired my own attorney. We responded appropriately, denying everything, threatening countersuits. The legal letters flew back and forth for weeks until both sides realized how mutually destructive this path would be. We reached a cold truce. I dropped my countersuit. He dropped his fake claims, but the damage was permanent. I met my grandson Christopher once, when he was 3 months old. Derek and Veronica brought him to town for a family event on her side, and I was granted a supervised 2-hour visit at a public park. I held that baby boy and felt my heart crack open. He had Margaret's eyes. He grabbed my finger with his tiny fist and held on tight. Derek watched me like a hawk the whole time, as if I might steal the child or poison his mind against them. Veronica kept checking her watch. When the 2 hours were up, they took Christopher and left. Derek said they'd be in touch about the next visit. That was 3 years ago. I haven't seen my grandson since. I've sent birthday cards, Christmas presents, letters. Most are returned unopened. The ones that get through receive no acknowledgement. I've tried calling, emailing, showing up at their building, only to be turned away by doormen with instructions not to allow me up. Derek has made his position clear through his attorney. Unless I am willing to provide appropriate financial support to my grandson, meaning hundreds of thousands of dollars, I won't be part of his life. My son is holding my grandson hostage for money. Last year, I turned 73 and realized I needed to face the inevitable questions of mortality and legacy. I met with my estate attorney, Jonathan Price, a sharp man in his 50s who'd handled my business contracts for 15 years. I want to revise my will, I told him. I want to write Derek out of it completely. Jonathan didn't look surprised. He'd witnessed enough of my legal battles with Derek to understand the situation. That is your right, Robert, but I need to make sure you understand the implications. What about your grandson? I'll set up a trust for Christopher that Derek can't touch. He'll get it when he turns 35, old enough to have his own relationship with money, and hopefully some independence from his father. And the rest, I thought about that. Split it, half to charity organizations Margaret cared about. Cancer research, women's shelters, education programs. The other half to my employees, the men and women who built Thornton Construction with me. Bonuses based on years of service. Jonathan drafted the documents. I reviewed every word, making sure there were no loopholes, no way for Derek to contest based on technicalities. We included a no-contest clause. If Derek challenged the will, he'd lose even the token dollar he'd receive, and Christopher's trust would be reduced. When I signed those papers, I felt relief and grief in equal measure. Relief that I'd protected what I'd built from someone who'd squander it. Grief that this was what our relationship had become. I didn't tell Derek immediately. There was no reason to. The will would speak for itself when the time came. But somehow, he found out. I suspect Veronica has connections everywhere, including in Jonathan's office, though nothing was ever proven. However it happened, 3 months after I signed the new will, Derek showed up at my house unannounced. I opened the door to find him standing there in an expensive coat, face red with fury. You wrote me out. No greeting. No pretense. Straight to it. You heard, I said calmly, not inviting him in. 8 months. You waited 8 months after Mom died, and then you cut me off. Your only son. You cut yourself off, Derek. Years ago. I just made it official. How dare you? He was shaking. After everything, after being my father. Being your father isn't just about leaving you money. It is about values, respect, family. Things you forgot about when your mother was dying and you were too busy to visit. Things you forgot when you held your own son hostage from me, unless I paid ransom. I never. Don't lie. I have the emails from your attorney, the explicit offers, X amount for visitation rights. You turned your own child into a bargaining chip. Derek's face went through several emotions. Anger, shame, defiance. Defiance won. I am going to fight this. I am going to challenge that will. On what grounds? I am of sound mind. I have excellent documentation. You'll lose and waste money on attorneys. We'll see about that. He turned to leave, then stopped. You know what? You were never really my father anyway. Just a walking checkbook. Now that the check stopped, I guess we're done. Those words should have hurt more than they did. Maybe I'd already grieved the loss of my son. Maybe I'd accepted that the boy I raised was gone, replaced by this stranger in an expensive coat. We've been done for a long time, Derek, I said quietly. I just finally admitted it. He left, tires screeching as he pulled away. I thought that was the end. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I was served with papers. Derek was petitioning the court to have me declared mentally incompetent, seeking guardianship over me and control of my assets. According to his filing, I was suffering from dementia, making irrational decisions, and was a danger to myself. The betrayal of it took my breath away, my own son trying to have me declared insane so he could seize control of everything I'd built. His evidence was laughably thin. I'd forgotten a lunch date once. I'd been at a job site and lost track of time. I'd asked him the same question twice in one phone call months ago. I'd been distracted, not demented. I'd made unusual financial decisions, giving bonuses to long-time employees. None of it was remotely credible. But he was forcing me to defend my sanity in court. Jonathan assembled a team. We gathered medical records, cognitive tests, depositions from friends and colleagues. My doctor testified I was in excellent mental health for my age, sharp as I'd ever been. My accountant testified that my finances were meticulously managed. My crew foreman testified I was still actively running complex construction projects. Derek's attorney brought in a psychiatrist who'd never met me but was willing to speculate, based on Derek's descriptions, that I might be experiencing age-related cognitive decline. The judge looked skeptical throughout that testimony. The lowest point came when Derek himself took the stand. Under oath, he painted a picture of a confused, declining man who no longer recognized reality. He claimed I'd forgotten Margaret's name, forgotten entire conversations, become paranoid and accusatory. All lies, complete, calculated fabrications. When it was my turn, I looked my son in the eye as I testified. I recounted every conversation, every request for money, every broken promise. I pulled out records, emails, documentation of everything. I showed the court exactly who was confused about reality. The judge took 1 day to rule. She denied Derek's petition entirely, called it frivolous, and likely motivated by financial rather than medical concerns, and ordered him to pay my legal fees. She also issued a stern warning about wasting the court's time with baseless claims. Derek wouldn't look at me as we left the courtroom. He and Veronica walked out quickly, her arm around him, whispering in his ear. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt hollowed out. My son had tried to steal my mind, my autonomy, my life's work. And when he failed, he simply walked away without a word. That was 8 months ago. Since then, silence, no calls, no messages, no contact. I hired a private investigator once, just to see photos of Christopher, to know he is okay. He is 6 now, in kindergarten plays soccer. He has Margaret's smile. That is all I know of my grandson. I am 73 years old, and I am alone. The business still runs, my crews still build, the money still accumulates, but the house is empty. The holidays are silent. The legacy I wanted to leave is going to strangers and institutions instead of family. Some nights I wonder if I was too harsh, if I should have just given Derek what he wanted, kept the peace, bought my way into my grandson's life. If pride costs me everything, was it worth it? But then I remember Margaret in that hospital bed, Derek checking his phone while she tried to talk to him. I remember him calculating his inheritance while she fought for every breath. I remember him forging documents and lying under oath. I remember him trying to steal not just my money but my dignity, my competence, my very identity. And I know I made the right choice. Being a father doesn't mean enabling your child's worst instincts. It doesn't mean funding their selfishness or excusing their cruelty. Sometimes being a father means saying no. Sometimes it means letting them face consequences. Sometimes it means walking away when staying would destroy you both. I loved Derek. I still do, in a complicated, grief-stricken way. But love doesn't mean surrender. It doesn't mean sacrificing yourself on the altar of someone else's greed. I've made peace with my decisions. The will stands. The trust for Christopher will be there when he is old enough to use it wisely. The charities will help people who need it. My employees will be rewarded for their loyalty. That is the legacy I choose. And if Derek wants to hate me for it, if he wants to keep Christopher from ever knowing me, if he wants to spend his life bitter about what he didn't inherit, that is his choice, his burden to carry. I built an empire, and I am leaving it to people who earned it through dedication rather than DNA. That is not cruelty. That is justice. Sometimes the hardest part of being a father is accepting that you can't save your child from themselves. You can't force them to be better than they choose to be. You can only control your own actions, your own choices, your own integrity. I chose to stop enabling. I chose to protect what I built. I chose to honor Margaret's memory by refusing to let her son drain away everything she sacrificed for. And I chose to believe that someday, maybe when Christopher is older, he'll want to know his grandfather's side of the story. He'll see the truth behind his father's bitterness. He'll understand that sometimes love means boundaries, and that inheritance is about values, not just money. Until then, I am at peace. I work my projects. I remember my wife. I live with integrity. My son tried to take everything from me. My money, my mind, my dignity. He failed. What he doesn't understand is that he already took the thing that mattered most years ago, long before lawyers and courtrooms. He took himself away from me, piece by piece, choosing greed over love, money over family, pride over connection. I didn't write Derek out of my will as punishment. I wrote him out as acceptance of what he'd already done. He'd written himself out of my life long before I wrote him out of my estate. That is the truth he'll never acknowledge, the reality he'll never face, and that is the saddest part of this whole story. I hope someday he understands. I hope someday Christopher knows his grandfather loved him even from a distance. I hope someday someone learns from our mistakes. But hope is all I have now. Hope and the knowledge that I stayed true to myself in the end. That has to be enough.